right, let's open up the conversation now. Joining me right now, CNN legal analysts Shan Wu and Michael Zeldin, who are both former federal prosecutors. Also with me here, CNN crime and justice reporter Shimon Prokopets. Good to see you all this Sunday. All right, so Shimon, you first. How critical will Sondland's testimony be?
I think probably one of the most critical witnesses in all of this, because when you look at the text message that you just had up on the screen, that Sondland had this conversation he had with the State Department, the career State Department diplomat, where all sorts of issues were raised. The career diplomat was raising issues of whether or not the president was withholding money because of political reasons, because of the political campaign reasons, more importantly. And those conversations are going to be very important. There's a phone conversation between this diplomat and Sondland that we really don't know much about. That's going to be something that members of Congress are going to dive into and want to know. And of course, that conversation, there was a gap. There was a 5-hour gap between the text messages that the State Career Department ambassador sent to Sondland. There's a 5-hour gap there. What was going on in that 5-hour gap? We know now that Sondland talked to the president. The president told him, by all accounts, what we read in the Washington Post, told them what to say. And there it is, that text message. That is going to be something that they're going to dive into and is going to be a very important part of what he tells them on Thursday.
Yeah, so there was that 5-minute gap, 5-hour gap, and then there was that roughly 20-minute gap between, the diplomat asking for clarification and then the call me. So Shan, what would you ask Sondland?
I'd like to ask Sondland whether he suggested to the president, Mr. President, you better tell me there's no quid pro quo, or whether Trump brought that up himself. Because just because he can quote the president as saying that, it's very self-serving on Trump's part, of course. But also, I'd like to know the context for it. Why was he talking to Trump, and how did that topic come up? I think that'd be important to know, Fred.
Right, and Michael, Sondland is also reportedly expected to say, he wasn't even sure about whether the president was telling the truth when, Trump directed Sondland to say, there would be no quid pro quos of any kind. What would be your questions to him about that?
So what I want to understand from Sondland is the broader context. That tweet, or text rather, that, there was no quid pro quo, you can bring to it saying the president was just telling him the truth, or he didn't know whether it was truth or not. But I want to know from Sondland, what was his broader understanding? He met with Giuliani a number of times throughout the summer. He's speaking to Bill Taylor. He's speaking to Ambassador Volker. He's speaking to the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine. What was the broad understanding? Because these individual one-off statements only matter in the broader context. And if it can be established that everyone had a clear understanding, implicit as it may have been, that we were not going to give military aid, or we were not going to give a meeting at the White House until there was an investigation into the Bidens, that's a very damaging picture, much more so than the Ambassador Sondland going to the president saying, I've been asked about this, what is the official policy of the administration? So context matters most of all to me.
And then Shan, I wonder, how can those images be removed when in so many variations, whether it's the text, whether it's the transcript, whether it's the actual admission of, say, Giuliani on the air, and even the president, in front of, cameras, saying that, yes, there was an encouragement of Ukraine to look for dirt on the Bidens. So how is any of this, any of the testimony, how is it to erase the statements already made?
I don't think it can be erased, Fred. I think the only choice that Trump has at this point is leaning into his statement. Ultimately, after they get through all the obstructionist efforts not to have anyone testify, they're going to have to lean into it and say, look, the statement's out there. We don't think there's anything wrong with this. This quid pro quo thing is just some obscure legal term that's being used against me, but I didn't do anything wrong. I'm allowed to do this. I think that's the only position he can take, because there's no way to erase any of those images.
Yeah, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff was on the airways today and said this about impeachment.
There doesn't need to be a quid pro quo, but it is clear already, I think, from the text messages that this meeting that the Ukraine president sought was being conditioned on their willingness to interfere in the U.S. election to help the president. That is a terrible abuse of the president's power.
So, Michael, is he really underscoring what Shan just said, which is, you don't have to have that, technical term. The information or some of the evidence is already out there?
Well, it is, and the important thing to remember in an impeachment inquiry is that impeachment is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. It's not the maladministration of office. And so if what this turns out to be is we don't like the way Trump is conducting himself, the maladministration of his office, but it doesn't rise to the level of an abuse of the powers of his office, then I think impeachment fails. If, on the other hand, it is an abuse of the powers of his office, that he is trying to obtain information personally beneficial to him at the expense of U.S. national interests, then he falls into the high crimes and misdemeanors. That has to be fleshed out, I think, as the hearings progress.
So, Shimon, as for the whistleblower complaint, which really got the inquiry, going, is it something under consideration that abuse of power can be substantiated without the testimony of that whistleblower after all, particularly since there has been so much talk about protecting the identity and the welfare of that whistleblower?
Yeah, absolutely, because when you think about it, there's really what you're seeing members of Congress there and shift to is try to bring out a lot of other evidence. We may never hear publicly from the whistleblower. That is something that we should all be prepared for. It could happen. It could be that we never hear from this person. His statement perhaps will be made public at some point, but they have the transcript and all of the things that the whistleblower has complained about and the issues he has raised. There are other ways that members of Congress are going to try to substantiate that. They could talk to other people who were part of the team that was on this call, their experiences over this whole Ukraine issue. And this is what we're seeing now. This is why people like Sondland are coming in, Volker, perhaps Bill Taylor, the career State Department guy who could come in and give some testimony too. So there are other ways to substantiate what the whistleblower, the complaints by the whistleblowers and others, where they would not even need to bring some of these people. And the other thing that I want to raise about Sondland, and some folks have raised this, is that no one even understands 100% why Sondland was in the middle of all of this. He is the ambassador, but he's not the Ukrainian ambassador, right? So there's some questions about why he was involved in this entire thing, and I think that's something else that I think is important. It's because of his relationship with the president, right? He gave $1 million to the inauguration. He's this business guy that the president trusts, and the president has put him in charge of this. But the questions are going to be why, and I think that's going to be a big part of it. But you do raise a good point here, Fred. Can this all be done without the whistleblower? And I think people should be prepared that we may never hear publicly from this whistleblower, and we're seeing members of Congress really trying to protect him. They're talking about doing secret meetings with him, maybe having some way where they can talk to him where he doesn't have to be identified.
Him or her.
So him or her, I should say. We don't know. So there are things that are going to be done here to protect this whistleblower, and it could be very, very much and very well that we don't hear from this person.
Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. Shimon Prokopets, Michael Zeldin, Shan Wu. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Fred.